I'm just saying. As a Star Trek Enterprise fan, I am feasting right now. I'm so happy. Hello, interwebs! I hope you're all doing well, and I am here to review the latest and sadly penultimate episode of Star Trek Picard. This one, Season 3, Episode 9, Vox. And I'll be very frank with you up front here. I will do a spoiler-free section, but if you watch the end of last episode, you kind of know that this episode probably starts off with a big spoiler. That is pretty much the biggest spoiler of the season and also the focus for most of the episode, so it's kind of difficult to stay spoiler-free. But if I'm going to try to stay spoiler-free for a minute here, I will be frank and say I'm actually very, very mixed on this episode. There are a lot of things that I like, most especially on an interpersonal level. The dynamics between certain characters and some of the amazing, well-written, emotional dialogue that really just hones in on their relationships, I think is absolutely superb. And there are some moments in here in this episode that just like hit me in the gut, but also make me laugh and feel joy at getting to see characters bounce off of each other in ways that I really feel is true to their character in such a beautiful, wonderful way. And so on all of those levels, I think I am so pleased with this. And then also, just in terms of some nostalgia stuff, I know it's nostalgia stuff. You know what I'm talking about if you've seen the episode. I know it's nostalgia stuff, but goddamn am I not like, oh my God, that's amazing. So I am here for all of that. On the flip side, though, there are some choices with some of the larger plot elements and larger sort of season-long story arcs, as well as some implications of some of the maybe unintentional sort of background thoughts around these elements of the season that I think are starting to crystallize for me in this penultimate episode that has left me a little bit more lukewarm. And it's one of those things that I constantly have a problem with kind of modern Star Trek style storytelling that has been an issue in past seasons of Star Trek Picard, and to a lesser extent, though still existent in Star Trek Discovery, is some of the things that I was sort of like, I hope we get good answers to this. When we do get the answers, I am much more like looking back at the past elements of the season and being like, does this pay off that really well? I'm not so sure. So with that being said, I will say I am still excited to see what the finale is going to hold. And I think that the finale can do a lot of legwork in terms of these elements to make them feel a little bit more like they fit what we've sort of been building to this whole season. But as it stands, I have a lot of issues and concerns with some of the bigger plot developments. I will also be frank with you, I got this episode as a screener, and so I have a lot of thoughts that I actually need to express, so this is probably going to be a longer review, and I'm going to kind of try and split this up into a bunch of different segments. So with that all said, let's get into spoilers, because I have many thoughts, both positive and negative, on this episode. Alright, so now that we're in the spoiler-filled section, I'm just going to say this right up front. I will do a plot-by-plot, scene-by-scene breakdown like I normally do in just a moment, and then I'm also going to end this video on kind of a mini rant, and it might end up being a long rant, so I might even spin it out into its own video because it's sort of a larger discussion that I kind of want to have based on some of the things that I was seeing this season. So we'll get that at the end of the video, and stick around for that because hopefully it'll be illuminating. At least it's something that I feel I need to express. But let's start off this discussion with the thing that I think everyone is going to be talking about and have probably very disparate reactions to. I'm actually very intrigued to see what the larger fan discussion is going to be about this reveal, and that is the fact the thing that is behind the red door that Jack has sort of been hearing this entire season is the Borg.
It's fun.
I called it. I've been calling it for a couple weeks now. Just saying, you can pat me on the head, give me my head pat, someone give me a lollipop. I think I deserve a lollipop for getting it right. What I will say is I can kind of see two different reactions to this reveal just on its face, because I have been seeing a lot of people in the fandom sort of speculating on what it possibly could be. One element I saw people arguing for was maybe it's the pod race from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and I can see with people sort of building up theories and sort of having those expectations that seeing that it's the Borg can come initially across as a disappointment, especially since the Borg have been a villain that we have kind of seen elements of throughout the entirety of Star Trek Picard. I mean, we got the XBs in season 1 of Picard, we got sort of the Queen, Annie Wersching's Queen, and sort of what she was doing in season 2, and so saying like, oh, another season where the big villain is the Borg could be a disappointment. And I certainly feel that. There is an element to me like, oh, okay, of course it's the Borg. But I also see the argument here on another front in that, number one, this is the show that is Star Trek Picard. It is named after Picard, and also this season is very much a kind of TNG reunion wrap-up, sort of concluding a lot of the storylines of the TNG era, like things with Ro Laren and stuff like that, and things with Lore as well, in Data. And so having the Borg come in, I think is, in a way, kind of fitting of that ethos and sort of direction of the show. Because the Borg have always been Picard's biggest nemesis, besides like Damon Bach, who of course is Picard's biggest nemesis. We all know Damon Bach is Picard's biggest nemesis.
I'm going to kill your son, Picard, just like you killed mine.
But no, jokes aside, the Borg are his big enemy. And so it feels a little bit fitting in that respect. But even on top of that, I can go back and even spin it a little bit more and say, it feels weird to me structurally that you've been building this entire season up to feature the Changelings as the villain. You have an amazing performance with Amanda Plummer as Vadic, just killing it this entire season. And then you sort of like dispose of her, still technically have the Changelings around, but kind of have them sort of fade back as just sort of like a background element, and then really center the Borg as we get to see in this episode. And that feels like a weird bait and switch and a weird structural problem with this season as a whole. It's a kind of like, just like sort of shunts a lot of the buildup that you've been having with the Changeling this season to sort of focus on something completely different. Also, another element that you could toss into this as well is that this is the first time we've seen the Borg Collective since arguably Star Trek Voyager. We got a little hint of them in Star Trek Prodigy, a little bit in Star Trek Enterprise, but really this version of the Collective we have not seen since Voyager. So that getting to kind of get a wrap out on that element of things, I think makes them distinct from how we saw them in Season 2 and Season 1. And I can also see it in the mindset of, Terry Matalas and a lot of people online who have been working for Star Trek Picard, like Dave Blass and others, have been talking about how these final 2 episodes are meant to be like the big Next Generation movie that we never got to have, that sort of wraps everything up. And so if you're thinking about it in that way, it does kind of make structural sense to have a different villain for this finale, and sort of like have it sort of like be its own sort of segmented thing. So I'm going to be frank with you, I am not really settled on any of those, especially since I haven't seen the season or series finale just yet. But I do sort of think that a lot of people are going to have different reactions to just the reveal on its face because of the many different expectations that I think people are going to be coming into this with. If people were expecting this to be kind of more of a natural flow of the season so far, they might be disappointed. If they see it as more of a sort of like a separate movie, they'll be excited. If they see it as more of this is a show that should kind of become its own thing and sort of stay within its own rules that it had set up throughout the season so far, they might be disappointed. But if they sort of see it as more of a kind of continuation and a nice conclusion note towards Next Generation as a whole and these characters as a whole, I can see them liking it. So I think that these varied perspectives are going to kind of bring a lot to what people perceive they feel about this reveal. Okay, so that was the big rant that I kind of need to put at the beginning here, because I am going to have a lot more thoughts about how the Borg are depicted within this episode, because I have many thoughts about that, but I wanted to have a specific discussion separately on how the Borg appear in this episode and what that means for the show. So it's kind of like digging into different elements of this. Let's go on into actually discussing some of the beat-by-beat plot points, and then I'm going to have a larger rant at the end of the episode about the depiction of the Borg within this episode itself and my concerns and issues with that. But getting into the plot beat, I really liked this opening sequence with Deanna trying to help interpret Jack's dream. I really like Deanna getting to be sort of the investigative therapist and trying to help Jack sort of like reinterpret his symbols, like the vines we've been seeing, we get reinterpreted into roses and a memory of Jack, and sort of her sort of helping him interpret these symbols. And it showcases something that Deanna never really got a ton of chances to do in TNG, which is be an active agent in uncovering a mystery or uncovering a story. She got a few things here and there of it, like in season 7 of TNG, she got some cool stuff with that, with like the episode where like there's the skeleton in the cell. I think it was an interesting one. I have mixed feelings on that episode as a whole, but I like Deanna's like place within that narrative to a degree. So I like seeing her getting to be that role here, and the sense of dread building up to the Borg reveal. This entire sequence was so good. The change in lights from this sort of red hue to the black and white in the corridor in Jack's mind was amazing. The lighting team on this episode, ooh, I know there's been a lot of like people sort of complaining about the darkness of the lighting on the ships and in different areas this season, but that lighting gag that they did, spot on. Credit to production team on that. So then we move into the next scene where Deanna's sort of revealing that it's the Borg to Picard and Beverly and everybody, and I have to say, the idea here that they are sort of throwing out is that Picard didn't have Irumodic syndrome, that it was actually the Borg that caused him to be diagnosed with that, and that he passed it on to Jack, which has me sort of sitting here thinking, so does Picard have Borg sperm? Does he have Borg sperm? That's like the right level of Star Trek weirdness for me. Your mileage may vary on stuff like that. Like, some people may be like, what? That's weird for me. For me, like, it's dumb. I'm gonna be very clear. I think it's kind of dumb because it sort of implies that we hear later on in the episode, like, Geordi sort of saying, like, well, the Borg when they assimilated you, they tried to give you organic components and things like that. And I'm just sitting here being like, so you're telling me during Best of Both Worlds, when Locutus was assimilated, one of their top priorities during like the 2 days or so that he was Locutus was to be like, all right, we need to like make him have Borg sperm. This is a top priority. Get on it, everybody.
A futile maneuver. Incorrect strategy. Number 1.
I don't really buy that necessarily. Because the other option for me would be that every Borg has this sort of sperm problem, or like whatever Borg organic issues with them, which then leads me to questions like, do other XBs have this issue? Would Hugh from season 1 of Star Trek Picard have Borg sperm too? Or does 7 of 9 have a Borg womb, which is a phrase that I never want to use again, ever, or think about. so it is dumb. But there is a certain level of, like, weird, dumb science that has always been involved in Star Trek. I mean, just, like, look anywhere. Look at Threshold alone is some of the weirdest, dumbest things in Star Trek. So it's by no means new for Star Trek to have these sort of, like, it's Borg sperm sort of nonsense. And I actually kind of find that part of what endears me to Star Trek quite a bit. And I actually do like some of the things that it explains. Like, for example, Picard being able to hear the collective even after he was unassimilated or sort of reclaimed after Best of Both Worlds, but he could hear the collective in First Contact. So I actually like that it explains those elements. But yeah, it's just very silly thing. So again, I think your mileage may vary on that particular element. But when Picard says there was a seed of something later on when he's talking to Jack, I'm like, what a word to use, Picard. What a word to use in this context. It's just funny. But this does get to me something that I do earnestly really like, and that is Picard's very, like, guilty reaction to this, about having passed this on to Jack. He feels a lot of guilt at all of this. I think Patrick Stewart plays it really well. And then we get a quick moment where Deanna sort of like the voice of reason, like, look, Jack's dangerous. We can't just let him go around right now. And then this brings me into the next scene where we get the scene between Picard and Jack. And this is where I'm going to be honest with you. I have a larger concern with the implications of how this is played between Picard and Jack, but I'm going to leave that towards my rant at the end of this video. So I'm going to have a larger discussion about the larger implications in place of the Borg within this episode at the end of this. So, with that in mind, focusing in on just the interactions between Jack and Picard, I thought this was really well sort of discussed between the two of them, because Picard is clearly a dad who feels a lot of guilt and a lot of pain at some of the, stuff that he is dealing with that he's passed on to Jack. And so he's sort of wrapped up in his own sort of feelings and not seeing Jack for who he is. And I like Jack kind of explaining how he feels about this reveal, because he's like, oh, I've always kind of wanted a collective. I've always wanted to be part of something greater that I didn't really feel a connection to as just an individual with my mom out on the frontier. And I like that if they reframe this idea in the final episode towards like a found family idea, like he's always wanted a sort of family, a found family, or his parents' family that he never really got to have and has sort of been co-opted and manipulated by the Borg as a feeling. I think that that's great as an idea. And then also I really like this idea of it when it comes down to his relationship with his dad, because Picard sort of says, like, this is a bad thing, I don't really accept you, but Jack is sort of reaching out for acceptance. It feels like a kid who's, like, wanting to be seen by his dad as the full person that he is, and not getting that acceptance from his father. And because of that, sort of lashing out in anger and sort of like running away. It feels very rebellious of a dad who doesn't fully accept you for who you are. As a queer person, I think that I have a lot of resonance with that, with it being like a coming out story. However, I have concerns with extending that metaphor too far, but I'll save that for the rant that I have at the end of the episode. So we will get there. But on an individual level, between these two characters, love it. We have Jack running away and escaping and sort of going off to meet with the Borg Queen that I'll discuss in a second. And once he's run away, we have Beverly and Picard having a quick scene about their feelings about it. And I love their different reactions to Jack running away. Beverly saying, I lost Wesley, her son, to space, and as a result kind of became an overprotective parent, being kind of a over-controlling parent and not letting Jack sort of go and explore himself and be his full self, which is why he never really got to understand who he really was. And you can see this quite often with, again, like the gay community. Again, I hesitate to take that metaphor too far, but I do like it as an emotional reaction for these characters. And Picard also, again, being very guilty and feeling I passed off the worst of myself to him. Again, feeling this, like, what do we give to our next generation? What do we pass on? And Picard can only see the bad things, not the good things that he gave to Jack. Even though we've seen this whole season that Jack is a cool dude. And it comes a lot of, like, where from what Picard was as a person, including his Borg elements, because Jack used his Borg elements to save people in last episode, and the episode before. So I actually think that, like, Picard sort of being very guilty but not understanding the totality of what he's given Jack, I think is really good. And then this leads into probably my favorite scene of the entire episode, to be frank with you, is the moment where Picard's sort of wrestling with all of this, and Data comes up to him and he says, can I do anything? And Picard's like, no. And Data sort of understands, and he just offers support. And it's a beautiful moment that I think honors the relationship that Picard and Data have had throughout the entirety of TNG, but especially in the movies, and especially in the first season of Picard. I think it honors Picard's feelings for Data as a friend, and as a Data Picard shipper, Dick Card shipper, as they say. I'm none too unhappy with this either, but on just a level within the universe and not my shipping fantasies. I actually really liked. I loved this scene. I thought it was a really beautiful moment that, again, kind of like in episode, I think it was 2 of the season between Beverly and Picard on the bridge of the Titan, this was a scene that really relied on the actors to tell the story and to carry the moment, and they do so brilliantly. And Brent Spiner and Petra Stewart nailed it. Then we sort of go and get an explanation from Geordi of some of the, like, science and logic behind the Borg stuff. I've already ranted about that enough, so I won't go too deep into it. But they realize they need to go to the fleet and sort of warn them about the changelings and the plan with the Borg. So we have that, and I love Shaw being like, oh, of course, god damn it. I was like Shaw. It's like Shaw's like, I'm just fucking done. Please, let me go home. I want to play with my models and sharpen my knife. Come on, it's all I want to do with my life. Come on. But then we arrive at the Fleet Museum, and again, nostalgia nonsense. It is purely nostalgia, but God, do I love it. We get Shelby, Commander Shelby from Best of Both Worlds, now Admiral Shelby.
May I speak frankly, sir?
By all means.
You're in my way.
Really?
It was so cool to see her. It was just really nice. And she's giving a speech about the NX-01 and the birth of Starfleet. My Star Trek Enterprise fandom was just like, yes, yes, say Archer. We support Scott Bakula fandom here. So I was in love with that, and then it was capped off with getting to see the Enterprise F, which is the starship design for the Enterprise F from Star Trek Online. So getting to see that in live action was gorgeous. I actually wish they hadn't spoiled that in the trailers, because it looks like it's just going to be like a brief thing with the Enterprise F. So I'm sad that they showed that off in the trailers way back, because it kind of diluted this moment. But that being said, this was a beautiful moment. Look at that handsome lady that the Enterprise F is. Very sexy. So was very pleased with that. But then we sort of get the problem set up here, which is they have this AI sort of fleet that's going to be co-opted by the Borg. And I liked Picard sort of calling out, like, Shelby sort of doing some Borg shit here. You live long enough to see yourself become the villain, I see, Shelby. Which I thought was just a fun little insight. It was a fun use of Shelby for that character beat. Though I wonder, are we going to see Captain Calhoun someday? I wish we could. If you don't know who I'm talking about when I say Captain Calhoun, that's fine. It means you're not an uber nerd like me. If you know who Captain Calhoun is, I adore you. I see you, New Frontier fans. We are here together. Anywho, beyond that, I will also say though, this AI and the Borg taking control of the AI ships feels like a little bit of a repeat of what they did in the Star Trek Lower Decks Season 3 finale with Admiral Buenamigo's Texas-class ships that also had the AI and also went rampant with Animus. So it kind of felt a little bit repetitious of that story beat. But what I will do to headcanon to make it make sense is that I believe that this like linking starship technology, let's just say it came from Admiral Buenamigo's research, and people was like, oh, we'll tone down the AI stuff, but we'll have it just be linking stuff together, and sort of comes out of that, and there's like a natural progression there. But it does feel a little bit repetitious story-wise of the Lower Decks beat, but I think it actually makes sense canon-wise. And then we have Picard sort of hailing everybody and sort of warning them, and I like that it's like stopped very quickly by the changelings, but Shelby is able to get enough of it to kind of get a little bit of a warning, but it sort of sets everything off with the Borg and the changelings. But again, I will sort of reiterate here, it is weird to me that we don't really get to, I don't think we get to see any changelings this episode, which again, I understand the shift from the changeling to the Borg, and again, your mileage may vary on that. But I would have liked a little bit more presence for them in these moments, but say la vie, what are you going to do? Again, your mileage may vary. I'm mixed on it, and it's going to more lean on whatever the series finale does with the Borg and this setup going forward. So I'll sort of leave it there. I'll sort of pass the buck off on to next review on that element. But jumping over, we do get to see Jack arriving on this really interesting looking Borg cube, sort of hiding in this transwarp conduit, which was fascinating to see. And he gets on the ship, and we start to hear the Borg Queen. And I was trying to place the voice of the Borg Queen. We don't get to see her face in this, but it sounded like Alice Krige. And I was wondering if they were going to go with her, with Alice, or if Annie Wershing would have been able to film some stuff before she sadly passed away, because I know they filmed Season 2 and Season 3 of Star Trek Picard back-to-back, so there was a potential possibility, just given production timelines, that she may have been able to reprise the role, but it sounds as if, and we don't get to see her just yet, so I can't say, but it sounds like it was Alice Krige who played the Borg Queen in Star Trek First Contact, the finale of Star Trek Voyager, and in Star Trek Lower Decks. So it was cool to see her back. I love Alice. She's fantastic as the Borg Queen. It was just also one of those things like, yeah, it just sort of made me remind myself of Annie Wershing's passing away, which was sad, but obviously no fault of anyone's. It's just is what it is. But Alice Krige, definitely no shade at her. She's phenomenal, if that's who the voice is, because it sounds like her. Sounds quite a lot like her. And I like some of the things that she says to Jack. She sort of says, I had different names for you and things like that, kind of like Locutus, and she chose Vox. You are the voice itself. You are the voice of the collective, of me. And I like her sort of seeing Jack as like an extension of herself, as an extension of the collective rather than as his own person, because that always kind of fits. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in my rant at the end of the video. We'll get there. But I like this sort of, that way of depicting how the Queen views drones and people that she uses within the collective. So I think that works very well. And so Jack gets assimilated. We then jump back over to the fleet, and everything's going to hell. The fleet is being taken over by the Borg now that Jack's there and sort of being taken over. And this was, again, I love the terrifying nature of everything just going to hell. I will say I am a bit worn out by Star Trek series finales or season finales, especially in Discovery and Picard, having these sort of like big battles with like a billion possible ships. It's like we literally have the entire Starfleet fleet here, which again makes no sense to me. It's sort of weird, like you're calling in every ship. What if there was stuff going on? I sort of headcanon that they say it's the entire fleet, but it's like just most of the fleet. Like it's like 75-80% of it, not really all of it, but still, I sort of like am done with like these escalations of like, it's the world ending, every possible ship is here, everyone's here, even your grandma's here, and everyone's in danger. So I sort of get tired of that escalation scale, but that's not a this season problem. It's a generalized sort of modern blockbuster problem, not even a modern Trek problem. Like modern blockbusters just generally tend to lean into everyone's in danger, the world's gonna end, beam to the sky sort of stakes, which I sort of get sort of tired of at a point. But also I had to go back and check, but it looks like Shelby is actually killed by the Borg during the opening attack, and I'm not entirely sure I enjoy that. While I do think it sets the stakes kind of similarly to how Ro's death set the stakes way back in episode 5 of this season, I will admit to being a little bit frustrated to see yet another woman character, and specifically a woman character who was one of the few in the Next Generation who felt really assertive and confident and career-minded like Ro was, come back into the series just to be killed off really quickly. Especially since Shelby, unlike Ro, is much more of a superfluous cameo. So I will admit to feeling a little bit disappointed at the death of Shelby, especially since we already had a very similar storyline done much more effectively already with Ro, and it feels not only repetitious, but just bringing back characters from the past, specifically women characters, just to murder them off. So I didn't really like that. But few things we have going on here. I love Geordi sort of freaking out and being like, oh my god, they're trying to assimilate everyone. This is what they're going to do. They're assimilating everyone in the fleet. He's sort of having a moment, and Data's like, hey, calm down. We need a plan. I like Data being the voice of reason there. That worked really well for me. But we also get the reveal of what the plan is. And this I am much more, again, it'll go into my rant at the end, but I on its face still too. I'm sort of like, okay, we learn that the Borg's plan is to create a message that will assimilate everyone in the fleet, but specifically the young kids, on the under 25-year-olds of the fleet. And we start to see the entire ship sort of get taken over. There's an element to me is like, so everyone in Starfleet is under 25? Like, no, everyone's under 25 and everyone's a human and it affects them all in the same way? But it does make sense that even if you have just a significant amount of under 25-year-olds, that they'd be able to overwhelm a decent amount of the ships. So there's that element of it. But it also sort of reads to me as like a justification for the kids being assimilated, but not our main TNG characters. I see the hand of the writer a little bit in that choice, where it's like, well, we want to have the TNG crew versus the Borg, and also sort of like focus in on our older characters that we have going on here. So how do we sort of justify that? Oh, the Borg only assimilate under 25-year-olds. It's one of those sort of like yada, 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 we just wanted to set up this way sort of thing, rather than it kind of naturally stemming out of the situation. I'm kind of down on it. Hey, we want this thing to happen, so we're going to create a justification for it, rather than this is what would naturally happen in this situation. Then we start to see the disastrous nature of what's going on with the fleet. We hear Nolan North, by the way, famed voice actor Nolan North, who played Drake from Uncharted in the video games, and many, many, many more things, playing one of the captains. I was like, I know that voice. That's Nolan North. Hell yeah, I'm here for him. So that was great to hear as his voice gets destroyed and his ship gets destroyed, which was like, oh no, sad face. So setting the stakes there. But then we come to the moment that broke my heart. And that is, we have our ship crew fighting off against some of the Borg generation, I will call them, and Shaw gets hit, and he dies, but he does so validating Seven of Nine's identity and calling her Seven of Nine, finally completing his arc. And I will say, for me, Shaw, I am so upset that Shaw's dead, because he was fantastic, and I'll be frank with you, honest to God, Shaw is one of my favorite things of this season. He's an asshole, but he is an asshole who was learning and growing and sort of overcoming his own traumas and biases and stigmas that he had towards others. And so this end for him, I think, works really well. It sets the stakes going to the family that we care about die, but it's a nice resolution for him. And I'll be very frank, I am upset that he is dead because I really loved his character. I thought he was one of the most intriguing characters of not only this season, but in modern Star Trek. But if he were to go, this feels like a fitting resolution for him. I'm upset, I will riot that Shaw's dead, but I do think this is a very fitting and really emotional and great ending for him. But then we have our TNG crew getting off the ship. There's some funny little lines here where I love Data being like, oh, I hope we don't all die. And then they go to the Fleet Museum and they open up the bay doors, and of course, is the sexy USS Enterprise D. I love that the explanation for why the D exists is that Geordi sort of like has been like working on it like a model car in his garage. It's like, yeah, Dad's working on the Enterprise D out in the garage, honey. I'm getting my parts. I'm gonna order little parts from Amazon and just stick it in my car or whatever. Like that's how I just imagine Geordi just being like, oh, I'm just tinkering away at this huge starship. I actually think that's kind of adorable and fits Geordi. So it's a little bit of a yada yada, but I think I actually really love it quite a lot. I think it's cute as hell that Geordi does that. I also think it's hilarious where they're like, well, we can't use the E. And Worf's like, it wasn't my fault. Which does, I think, canonize that Worf was the captain. It's not confirmed, but Worf was the captain of the Enterprise E at one point. So that was speculated on. I think it was hinted at in one of the Star Trek novels, The Last Best Hope by Una McCormick. But I don't think was officially confirmed. And still technically it hasn't been, I guess. But it sort of hints at that. And I just have to go, Worf, what'd you do to the E? What'd you do to the E? What'd you do, Worf? Which is just fun. But then we get on the D, and again, nostalgia nonsense. I understand. But man, did that bridge not look sexy as hell in modern lighting and modern, like, it looked so immaculate. I loved it. Loved it so much. And I love Picard sort of having this moment of like, I missed the carpets. And I'm like, hell yeah, you did. You did the meme. They did the meme with the carpets. But I love that everyone's sort of saying like, hey, we're with you. We got this. We're going to do this. It was very heartwarming, very sweet. And so now we end out the episode with the D, with Picard's D going out to deal with Picard's sperm problem. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm going to do the Picard like face plant. I'm going to do it to myself. It's funny. Anywho, I love that ending. Also, on the Enterprise D, we get Majel Barrett's voice as the voice of the computer, which is, it sounded so sweet. I do wonder if they used AI to recreate her voice, which I hope they didn't. I hope they used, like, sourced footage. I had an issue with, like, sourced footage in Star Trek Prodigy, just because they, like weirdly amalgamated a bunch of different characters' voices in that episode, where they had, like, characters' voices. I love Star Trek Prodigy, by the way, just to be clear. Just that one episode I had a problem with. But here, if they, like, sourced, like, little computer lines here and there from Majel Barrett, was great. But yeah, it's the queen of Star Trek herself, getting to voice the computer one more time. Was very sweet. That's my thoughts on this episode. Like you can already tell, I am very mixed and up and down on this episode as a whole. There are a lot of things that I like, especially the emotional moments between characters, I think work well. But there's a lot of like plot yada-yadaing and some elements that I'm sort of more mixed on that I have a problem with or kind of have a sort of like feeling on. So that's where I stand on this episode. That being said, I do have one major concern that watching this episode, especially because I got it a few days ahead of when it released, because I got it on Monday and you're seeing this on Thursday, that made me sort of sit down and be like, why is this making me uncomfortable? Why do I have a problem with this? And I think it goes into how the Borg are depicted and how we think about the Borg. So I'm going to be honest with you, this is going to be a little bit of a rant. Hey everyone, so actually, I did a very, very long rant at the end of this video about my thoughts about the Borg. So if you want that rant, I've decided to separate it out into its own separate video. So go check out that video if you want my thoughts on the Borg. I think it's, honestly, I think it's a very necessary and vulnerable discussion. So check out that video if you're interested on it. I will leave it sort of separate so that this video doesn't become super, super long, because that rant became a whole video and discussion upon itself. And I wish you all, my friends, a live long and prosper.